Hello everyone and welcome back to KSP 101. This is episode 36. In the last episode, we left off returning from Tylo and discovering that we are now off to explore Vall, the second closest moon to Jool in the Jool system. We are to go to Vall orbit, gather some scientific data from the space around Vall, and return to Kerbin from orbit of Vall. In the last episode, I explained doing this the way that we have with all of our other missions. In doing so, we shall be launching out a station to put into orbit around Vall, and then sending a vessel to dock up with that station, and then return. If not, do a Vall landing and then return from that. So to begin, we are probably going to update our KSS series with a new one to send out to Vall, but before we consider doing that, let's check out our latest model, the KSS-3. Now this is the one that we used to send the station out into Jool orbit, and then we did a quick flyby and dip into the Jool atmosphere and returned from Jool. So we may just go ahead and consider using this to go ahead and knock that out. But it would be probably a little better if we went on ahead and just launched the station out by itself and then launched to the station and did the landing on Vall. However, the landing is going to be a little more complex than the simple straight to end landings that we've done in the past, because we are going to go on an Easter egg hunt for a very special Easter egg on Vall, and it will be the first Easter egg that we have featured in this tutorial series. So, ultimately it may actually be better to go ahead and send this out to Vall and return, and then send the landing vessel out after that. But we may want to have some fuel left on the Vall station, so that after we land and check out that Easter egg, we can dock back up and refuel before coming home. So therefore, we may want to go ahead and update this to allow for that. So, let's try to prepare for that instead. We're going to leave this vessel exactly how it is, minus this command pod, I believe. So let's go ahead and prepare this for that. I guess to do so, we will need to get rid of this command pod and put a structural part in the place of it there. We'll go ahead and try that out and see how that works out for us. Let's go to our structural parts and put the larger adapter here as soon as we find it. There it is, the Rockomax brand adapter 02. We'll just place that here. And we can get rid of that decoupler as well, reducing a good bit of the mass. Now let's see what we have to work with. Everything seems to be strutting back properly, which appears to be okay. There's a few struts kind of getting a little funky there, but it's irrelevant. Let's check out all of it from the ground up. We'll be launching with these 5 engines, with some asparagus staging going on, which will lead to, I believe this is a wolfhound stage with 2 terriers asparagus staged. And then there's the station core itself. And that docking port is set up to link up with our current setup of the command pods for all of our vessels with the shielded docking ports, so that would be good. Now, just taking a gander, these 4 outer stages with the central stage should be enough to get us out to Vall and put it in orbit, with these stages being used to assist in making the orbit happen, leaving some leftover fuel there. But these 4 in the central stage should be enough to get it on its way to Vall. I believe it should be okay. We'll give it a shot. We'll update this real fast, update the save on it. We'll make it to KSS3A, since we didn't modify it, but it is pretty much the same vessel. Let's check our staging out. Everything seems fine. And if we launch it from Kerbin, it would have almost 6,000 meters per second ability to be, so it'll have much more than that whenever we launch it from the Mun. This will save us quite a bit of time if we go ahead and use this. And it was enough to get the station out to dual orbit, and then the vessel, which was using this stage, it was able to make it out closer to Joule, dip into the atmosphere, and make it home all in one go, so it should be good enough. And we should not have any connectivity problems due to the relays on this, which will be very useful. It will be an additional relay out in the Joule system, additional to the one that we have around Tylo, providing a little bit more connectivity in our relay network. So let's go ahead and launch this. But before we do, let's return to the Space Center and go to our tracking station so we can set up our transfer window. And today's early 9:30 in the morning no sleep video is brought to you in part by Honest Tea, the organic peach tea, which is quite fantastic. Also want to give a shout out to Space Eccentric for his coverage of the SpaceX mission this morning. Gotta give a big old F and a rest in peace to its first stage booster, which failed to land on the drone ship out at sea. Looks like they were having a lot of troubles this morning, but the Starlink payload was successfully deployed, so it's not a total loss at all. In fact, I would call that a success still. So fantastic work to everybody there at SpaceX amidst all the chaos going on with the coronavirus and so on. But anyways, we have our launch window set up to Joule, so let's go ahead and leave the tracking station and launch this station core out to Vall orbit. We'll begin by going to our launch pad, and then going down to the KSS3A and setting it up to launch from the Mun launch site. And hopefully those seats remain empty. Kerbals have a way of sneaking aboard these vessels, and we'll have to scrub the launch if they decide to try to sneak onto this. And then after we are done putting this in Vall orbit, we'll run out there and finish the rendezvous, docking, and transfer between 2 vessels and returning from the flyby. Let's go ahead and launch. This thing's a quick mover. As soon as it hits 50 meters per second, we are going to go ahead and go full sideways. Nailed it. I don't believe I have any nukes in this thing, but I doubt we'll have to worry about power. The biggest concern will be making sure that we have connectivity in our network once we arrive in the Joule system and start to dip behind Vall. Hopefully we come around in front of it to maintain connection while we are doing what we are doing. Let's get a good view and see what we're looking at. Okay, we are rising above all of the surface stuff on the Mun here, so we don't have to worry about that. And we're already over 5,000 meters in altitude, so let's go ahead and warp on over to our apoapsis so we can make our circularization and figure out where the MUN is relative to our transfer Windows profiling. Let's zoom out. We may already be in line perfectly from the looks of things. Let's open up our relay network to get a better view here. Youch. Okay, it looks like the MUN might be a little too far ahead. Let's go ahead and set Joule as our target. This thing's got plenty of rotation ability with all of the reaction control wheels. That's good. Okay, so the MUN's a little far ahead, but that's okay. We're just gonna go ahead and roll with it. Let's go ahead and make our circularization burn now. Wrap ourselves around the loving and comfortable arms of the MUN here. Let's check our periapsis. 51 by 53, looking good. Let's go ahead and time warp that target node over to our prograde mark. We can barely see it on the nav ball. Looks like right about here is almost where we want to be. We're going to warp ahead just a little bit once that gets a little closer to the prograde mark, say about there. Let's go ahead and warp until that target mark is about halfway into our prograde mark. I'm going to do a little rotation here to line myself up a little better on the nav ball, because I like to do that. Once we are there, let's begin to throttle up nice and slow to a full throttle. And we're just going to stay here in this view until it's time to stage, so we don't waste any delta V in the staging. We want to do a quick map check and zoom out real quick. Let's cut that engine, zoom out a little more, just to set this map up in preparation. Since we are already on our way out of the system, this thing has quite the thrust of weight. Very efficient delta V usage. Alright, let's go ahead and stage, and then throttle up and move away from that. Very good. This is a great transfer vessel that we have here. It's not really designed to push a whole lot of weight though compared to the vessels that we've been using with Tyler though, but this is a relatively simple mission compared to a lot of the stuff that we had to do around Tyler. Okay, we are well on our way now. Let's put our focus on Joule. Go back to our main view. Okay, so we have about 1500 meters per second of delta V remaining until it's time to stage. Should be enough to get that Joule encounter, I would say. I think we're right on track with everything as predicted. Communitrons are open, relays are good, solar panels are extended. Down to about 900 meters per second of delta V. Totally not going to be required to make this encounter happen. Once we do, we'll zoom in and set Vall as our target and try to prepare the encounter at Vall. But once we get this encounter with Joule, we're going to have to warp ourselves out of the MUN sphere of influence so we can see what we're doing. Let's just nail down that closest approach now. Once we have that encounter, let's zoom on in and prepare to leave the MUN sphere of influence. First, I'm going to put on a new track. There we go. Now let's go ahead and manually time warp out of the MUN sphere of influence. I believe we just left the MUN sphere of influence. We did. Alright, so there's our periapsis in relation to Joule. Let's try to move that a little closer, shall we? Try to move that up fairly close to where we need it to be with Vall. Say about there for now. I really gotta stop that rhyming thing. Alright, now let's get a beat on our descending node and then go ahead, manually time warp once. Didn't really affect our Joule periapsis, that's good. Now let's go ahead and warp out to that. Set ourselves up to lock onto the normal mark in advance once we arrive. Hopefully we don't lose that descending node once we leave. Okay, so we've arrived, looking good. Now let's highlight that Joule periapsis and try to make sure the orbital line on Joule is flush with itself so we can get a beat on where we are going to have to move this up to. Okay, now that we're locked onto the normal mark, let's go ahead and begin to throttle up so we can move that periapsis up. Once it gets nice and close to being flush with Joule, we're going to zoom in so we can set Vall as our target. And there's Vall. Let's set it as our target. Try to get a beat on this ascending node. And zoom back out until Vall is flush with its orbital line. Like so. And then we will continue to burn and bring that periapsis up as close to that as possible. And that ascending node should be close to that periapsis when we cut off. Say about there. 2 degrees off, that is not bad, we'll take it. We can adjust it once we get there. That looks pretty nominal, we'll take it. Let's go ahead and update our quick save. Find some more tunes to play while we continue on. Let's put it on shuffle and we'll have a good time with that. Alright, now, let's go ahead and manually time warp once. Did not affect our trajectory. Let's now go ahead and, let's see, we're going to most likely here, pull here, so we don't have to worry about that. And Bop won't be in our way at all. There's a chance that Tylo will grab us. So let's go ahead and warp in between Bop and Tylo there. And we'll take it from there. We'll set ourselves up to be pointing retrograde once we arrive. Now we just need to make sure that we don't lose connectivity of our vessel along the way. Also going to exit warp mode, that way we don't accidentally affect that. Looks like we have plenty of solar panel coverage, so we won't lose power. Looking good. Let's go ahead and refocus on our vessel so we can watch it along the way. Looks like a very nominal transfer. Didn't have to extend the apoapsis out too far. Really only extended it out that much to be able to wrap around Joule for our proper 90-degree insertion. We are just trucking along the way. So we'll be there in a couple minutes or so. So in the meantime, since we do have this time to spare, and I do like to fill this time up instead of just making it boring and empty, full of nothing, like the space that we are traveling through right now, let's take a look at Vall. Let's go ahead and put our focus on Vall, and zoom in on it. Now, we already did this in the last episode, but we are going to take a look again. The SOI is 2,400 kilometers, that's about 24,000 meters in altitude for a nice orbit around it, but it is still probably safe to make orbit anything higher than about 1,100 meters or 11 kilometers. There is not much gravity going on here, and we are aiming to land in this area of Vall. We're looking for a larger crater, and in the center of that larger crater up here will be the Easter egg that we are after. And hopefully we land in the correct large crater, because there are a couple, but I'm seeing the one we're after go around quite frequently as we are time warping here. But that will be for the next episode once we prepare to land on Vall, unless we are going to be returning from Vall orbit first after we dock up at the station. We'll find out then. If we go ahead and attempt a landing, it might become a rescue mission, depending on how we set up the vessel. But yep, there's our location, there's our destination, our target. We are going to set the station in an equatorial orbit, and then once we arrive for the landing, we are going to have to burn either normal or anti-normal, depending on the location upon our arrival, so we can target that crater to land at that Easter egg. Just want to make absolutely certain that we land at that Easter egg on the first go, and not waste too much time or fuel trying to find it. So I'll be preparing for that in advance in between the episodes. See, there's really not much else to go over here. Except, perhaps, let's try to get rid of some of this wobble and bobble. I'm going to zoom out and set the focus back on Jewel. There we go. Alright, so once we arrive, we are going to go to the prograde and do our retro burn until we get our Jewel orbit, and then we'll warp over to the ascending node and correct it to 0° inclination relative to our target, which is Vall. Then we will warp back around to the periapse, if not the apoapse out here at that point, to set up the encounter and make our way from there into Vall's sphere of influence and get ourselves in orbit. And that'll be it for the station launch. And then we'll just have to launch a vessel out to the station to rendezvous, dock up, transfer between the two vessels, and return from Vall orbit. And in that mission, we'll also do a nice close flyby of Vall, so we can get some science from the space near Vall, which we may go ahead and just knock out with this, depending on how much Delta V that we have. But we are also wanting to keep some of the Delta V in this vessel, and if we focus back on the vessel, I can show you. This tank is also set up to be able to be docked up with, so in the case of an emergency, we can undock this from the station and dock up to it with the return vessel in either of the missions, the return from orbit or return from the surface of Vall mission itself. So that's a good contingency to have. And I get the feeling we will have quite a bit of Delta V left by the time we are done putting this into Vall orbit, because we still have close to 2,000 meters per second of Delta V left here. What is the escape velocity on Vall, though? We need to find some things out here, so let's refocus on Jewel and then zoom back in and focus on Vall so we can get a beat on that information. We'll go to the parameters and the physical characteristics. The escape velocity is about 1,100, close to 1,200 meters per second. Let's see, we're in the Jewel system now, so let's refocus on our vessel. Okay, so we are definitely clear of Tylo there, that's good. As soon as this locks back onto retrograde, we'll warp on over to the periapses. So we are going to have a decent amount of Delta V to burn off, or orbital velocity to burn off to get into orbit around Vall once we arrive there, but that won't be an issue. Let's go ahead and time warp over to our periapses. Let's see, still have a few minutes to prepare in advance, that's good. We'll just reorient to the retrograde mark and then time warp a little closer. Give ourselves about 40 seconds or so to do this. Should be about a little further, about there. We'll go ahead and warp over there. And now let's wait for that to get a fine lock on that retrograde and then throttle up nice and slow. And watch our Jewel escape. We are going to have to stage soon, so let's prepare for that. And go ahead and stage. One. Still a decent thrust away here, and we have about 1,900 meters per second of Delta V left here. That's plenty for what we're trying to use this central stage for, as predicted. Let's go ahead and highlight that ascending node in our periapsis. And as soon as we get our apoapsis, we'll highlight that as well. Let's go ahead and cut our thrust now. And while we're at it, let's go ahead and try to bring this down a little closer, so we don't have to spend too much time trying to time warp around. Try to get a beat on the ascending and descending nodes, keep those open. We'll try to bring this down below pole there, in between pole and Tylo, at the risk of making contact with Tylo, which is definitely not what we want to do. Once it's in about halfway, we will cut thrust and go ahead and warp over to that ascending node now. But let's go ahead and point anti-normal in advance before we warp over to it. That way, as soon as we arrive, we can start burning. Let's get a look at this thing, see how much delta V. Okay, so we're about halfway through that stage. About 1100 remaining. There's a good view of Jewel. There's Lathe right there. Awfully close. We can see Vall there peeking its way out behind Lathe. Alright, so we're locked on to anti-normal. Let's go ahead and warp over to that ascending node and do our correctional burn for that degree of inclination relative to Vall. Let's get our stuff highlighted back up again here, so we can keep an eye on everything. And begin our anti-normal burn, moving nice and quick there. And there we are. Alright, now it is time to warp on over to our apoapsis. In fact, we may want to skip that and warp on over to our periapsis, but we'll do it manually to make sure that we're not going to be put into a vice grip with Tylo there. Ever watchful of the threat that is Tylo. Let's keep an eye on the encounter nodes there. Once we wrap back around to the periapsis, so we're getting close now, let's go ahead and reduce our warp and then set this up to automatically warp over to it and point retrograde upon arrival. That's not entirely ideal for what we're trying to do, but we'll see what happens. Let's go ahead and wait for that to lock onto retrograde, and as soon as it does, we'll begin retro burning to see if we can't get this approach a little closer. Okay, so retro burning is not going to be ideal right now. Let's go ahead and warp back around. Still not ideal. We'll have to warp around a couple times. It's awfully close. We may go ahead and stop at the apoapsis this time and try to correct that. So let's go ahead and stop there. Wait for that to lock on to retrograde and see if we can't bring that approach down a little closer now. It may be better to do a radial N burn. Let's set that up instead. We'll see what radial N does for us, but before we do, we'll update the quick save as soon as it locks on to radial N. Let's take a look at our vessel as well. Should not have any problem at all maintaining connectivity, especially now that we have that leftover station around Tylo, but it's not connected to it right now. Must be on the other side. Alright, let's update that quick save and see what this radial N will do for us. Let's highlight the approach node and our periapsis node and begin our thrust. Not bad, we'll take it. Let's go ahead and do that. Okay, what do we have an encounter with? Of course it's Tylo. It's not what we want. Let's continue that radial M burn until we lose that encounter. It's looking like it's taking up a bit of our delta V. Looks like we could attempt that, but looks like we also will smash into Tylo if we do that. So let's just go ahead and keep going with that burn. Wrap this around. This is taking more delta V than we wanted, but we'll just keep going. It's not too bad. Let's just wait until we get that encounter on Vall. right about there. There's our Vall encounter. We are going to have to fly by Tylo to lock that the way that we did it, but that's okay. It actually saved us a bit of Delta V, perhaps. So, let's go ahead and warp until we are under Tylo's sphere of influence. That way we can check on our Vall encounter from there. And we are now under Tylo's sphere of influence. Let's get a look at that. There's Tylo, and there's Vall. So we're going to fly right by Tylo here and put ourselves on an entry trajectory into Vall's sphere of influence from here. Let's go ahead and focus on Vall now. Find out where that's going to put us. Okay, we're still equatorial. That's good. Before we continue, let's lower the thrust limiter down to close to 10 and find a better song to play. Alright, now let's see what we can do. That's going to bring us out more, so let's point radio out instead. Once we're locked on, we'll try to bring that Vall periapsis in until we're nice and close to Vall, say at about 50,000 meters in altitude in orbit around Vall. That'll be good. We may need to bring the thrust limiter back up a little bit, but we'll find out. Okay, so now that we are locked on to radio out, let's begin to thrust up. It's not bad. We'll just keep that thrust limiter where it is for a nice fine tune. Just waiting for that to get to 50,000 meters in altitude. However, we do need to make sure that we are going to maintain connectivity. Looks like we may lose it. This is not in the direction that we want to be in orbit around Vall, so we're going to have to wrap it around to the other side. So we'll just let that continue to burn until it wraps around to the other side. That way we're in the proper direction of the orbit that we want. And we'll be able to maintain connectivity once we arrive at that periapsis. Okay, let's fine tune that to about 50,000 now. We'll put it at about 55,000, just in case our retro burn requires us to burn that down a little bit. Now let's update our quick save and head on over. We also need to make sure that didn't affect anything too much here at Tylo. Looking good. Alright, so let's highlight that periapse node and this periapse node to make sure when we manually time warp ahead once it doesn't mess it up too much. Okay, it did not. Alright, so let's go ahead and warp out of Tylo's sphere of influence, and then we'll focus back on Vall and warp on over to that periapsis. See how much time till. Okay, so about 4.5 hours. Let's warp to about there. Prepare to point retrograde, and upon arrival, we will need to bring our thrust limiter back up on this engine. Get a nice view as we come on in. Let's actually go ahead and try to cut that time warp now, so we can get some science from the space far above Vall. Once we stabilize our rotation towards that retrograde mark, we'll go ahead and take care of that. We have to keep an eye on our power though. Now let's find that science. Let's put our focus of our view up here on the probe, I suppose. Let's aim the camera there, zoom in, and let's try to find the science here. There's our gravity reader. It'll require the most. Let's go ahead and do that. We don't really need to worry about garnering too much science, so we won't worry about bringing it home with us. Now we should be able to transmit this. We should have enough power. Doesn't take too much. There we go. And I believe that's all the science on this vessel that we can do. Let's also go ahead and open our docking port shield. And then let's refocus on the center of mass. Put our camera back where it needs to be. There we go. Okay. And make sure the throttle thrust limiter is back up to full capacity there, looking good. Alright, now it's time to continue to warp close to that periapsis. Shouldn't have too much orbital velocity to burn off, but we'll warp to about a minute away from that periapsis just in case. Let's get a nice view as we make this approach. And now we are in the space near Vall. Let's see how much time we have to play with here. Refocus on our vessel by pushing the 2 sticks in. We have a little bit of time to play with. Let's go ahead and see if we can't get any just above Vall's midlands. Let's transmit that. Try to find our thermometer real fast. Don't have too much time to spare though. There it is. Let's go ahead and transmit this data as well. That knocks out the signs from the space near Vall, so we don't have to worry about that entirely. Now let's go ahead and begin our retro burn. Get a beat on our Vall escape and our Vall periapsis. So we can burn for an additional 10 seconds after we pass the periapsis if necessary. Won't be that big of a deal. We have a few hundred meters per second of delta V remaining. As soon as that wraps around, we'll re-highlight the periapsis and the apoapsis. And we'll just keep burning until that periapsis gets close to 50,000. And once it's at 50,000 or so, we will cut it off there. And then warp on over to it. And finish bringing the apoapsis down to closer to 50,000. Looks like it's almost time to stage though. We have to remember to get rid of this debris once we're done so it doesn't come back around and put us at risk. We should have full connectivity by the time we arrive. Looking good. Let's let that reorient to retrograde, hopefully quick enough to do this without any hiccups, such as lowering that periapsis down below 50,000 in our burn. Looks like we are locked on fairly well on that 90-degree inclination as well. Alright, let's go ahead and bring this down, being sure not to put our periapsis at risk of being lower than 50,000. Alright, so we have 50,121 by 50,047. We'll take that. Let's update our quick save. Now while we're here, let's try to find out where that crater is that we're going to land at. I believe it's over here. But we'll make absolutely sure whenever it comes time to do that landing. So we have our station out here in orbit. This is bolstering our relay network here in Joule now, which is great. Looking pretty good. I believe we're done here for now. We have a good bit of delta V left here, which is fantastic as well. Just want to make sure that we reorient the vessel to where the solar panels are going to get maximum exposure. So we'll put those to where they are north and south. Looking good. Let's update that quick save and then head back to the tracking station so we can get rid of our debris that we have created in this episode. And we still have roughly 21 minutes left in the episode to play with. It would to do this part of the mission. Bit of time doing a little bit of cleanup before we move on. We will head back to the Space Center after this to check on our contracts and see if there's anything else we can't pick up. We're also going to need to reclassify the KSS-3A so that it is labeled as a station and not a vessel, which it is still a vessel. Of course, all stations or anything that we toss out into space is considered a spacecraft or a vessel. but this is a station and we're going to make sure it's labeled as so before we continue. And looking forward to placing our 9th flag. That's going to be fun once we land at that Easter egg. Alright, let's highlight the information, double tap the name, click in to get rid of the mouse, use triangle or Y to move it over to station, and then hit X or A to accept, stick in, get the cursor back up, and deselect that information window. Looking good. Alright, let's head back to the Space Center by leaving the tracking station. Now we'll update our quick save now that everything is wrapped up there. Let's get some good tunes going. Alright, so now let's go to our mission control and see if there's anything else that we can gather up. Science data from the space around Tyler. That's some easy money if we want to do that. But we don't need it, not quite yet. Science data from the surface of Vall. We may update the KSS-3 and remove the station core and just leave the vessel. But we do need to update it to be able to carry some breaking ground science. Let's just take a look at our vessels before we decide what we're doing in the next episode, probably. We could just go ahead and send this thing out to Vall to dock up at the station in preparation for the landing and return from. Should be a relatively easy mission. Let's take a look at our J-Craft series, our J-series vessels. Say our most recent one was the J2 series. Let's take a look at these. See, there's our J1, J2, J2A, and J2B. That's the launch vessel. J2A is the vessel designed to send out that unmanned engine cluster. There's the J2. Let's check out the J2, see what we had to work with. Now this is the one that was designed to land on Tylo, so it's quite the beast of a vessel here. It does have that poodle there. This may be good enough to just go ahead and launch, but it may be overkill, but that's okay. Overkill is kind of what we want in this series. That way it's set up to be good for anybody who's playing to have enough just in case anything happens. This thing is great. Tons of Delta V on it to play with to try to find that Easter egg. Just don't like those vectors on it. I'm going to go ahead and try to get rid of the gimbling on that. Let's see if that won't help out. We'll lock the gimbals on those and see if that doesn't help us out a little bit. Make sure it's locked on all of those. Alright, so that might solve our wobble and bobble issues in the future if we ever use this craft. Which we may go ahead and just use this now to get on out to Vall to take care of our missions there. It did fairly fantastic at Tylo whenever I tested it. Unfortunately, it didn't do as good whenever I recorded it. But there may be a bunch of unnecessary things here. We can get rid of these. Those won't be entirely necessary. Is there anything else that won't be necessary? Not seeing anything else that we really need to worry about getting rid of besides those communitrons. So other than all of that, alright, let's try to do some predictions here. It's going to take these 4 outer stages and this central stage to get ourselves out to Jewel. And using the central stage to retro burn around Jewel, leading into these to get the Vall encounter and then get us out to Vall, using those to dock up at the station around Vall, leaving these stages for our landing, and so on. Possibly this central stage to assist in the landing at Vall. So you know what? We'll take it. Let's go ahead and make this the J2C. Save that, and then we'll go to Open Craft and check out our updates here. Go down to the J series and see what we have. Okay, there's the J2C. Still a relatively expensive vessel, but that's okay. We have money to play with. Okay, so this is going to be our Vall mission vessel. Now let's return to the Space Center, set up our window to transfer to Vall. See if we can't get this thing out to Vall within the hour mark in this episode. And if anything, we can put this thing into Vall orbit and take care of all that and see if it's going to be enough to make the landing, and if it's not, we'll just return with it. So let's go to our tracking station and set that up. And if it's not enough to really do our landing at Vall, then we'll go ahead and return and update the vessel based upon the information that we gather from that. Alright, so let's time warp Kerbin on around until we have our launch window set up. Maintaining some decent connectivity with our relay network out there to Joule now. It's a lot stronger with Duna now. That's good. Not as much redness going on. Probably will become quite red once Duna is on the far side of its orbit relative to Joule. Let's get that warp mode menu back up so we can prepare to shut that off. Just waiting for that now. Getting fairly close now. Once that line is lined up with the edge of the orbit, looking for right about there. Let's go ahead and cut that, zoom in, find out where the mun is. Looks like it needs to warp around just a wee bit more. Try to line it up at the edge of its orbit relative to Joule. Once we have that lined up, we'll go ahead and prepare to launch this vessel out. I believe we will take a quick break and do that in a separate episode though, because it may become a landing. See, the mun is pretty much where it needs to be. Let's leave the tracking station. We're going to go ahead and go into mission control and accept all contracts related to landing on Vall. Let's check our accomplishments out real fast too. See, there's the science data from the space around Vall, part of that contract as well, part of that one. We have gathered our first scientific data from Vall and entered Vall orbit, leaving the return to Kerbin from orbit of Vall part of the contract left. Let's go to mission control and see what we have. Anything related to Vall. Looks like we lost our opportunity to grab any of those contracts at the moment, but we'll check again once we dock back up at that station. Alright, let's update the quick save, update the main save. We'll cut this one about 10 minutes short for once. Take a quick break, and when we return here shortly in the next episode, we'll launch out the Vall and see if we can't complete the mission of landing at that Easter egg once we dock up to that station and knock out a bunch of stuff with that. We'll knock out the rendezvous with the vessel in orbit around Vall, dock up with it, technically creating the station at that point and transferring between the two vessels, and then we will make our Vall landing. So I'm going to prepare for that, nailing down the location that we need to land on in this quick break, and when I return here shortly, we shall do that in the next episode. But for now, thank you for watching. Hope you've been enjoying, hope it's been helpful, as always, and I will see you again soon. Goodbye.